Are you ready to think big and act bold? Then you are in the right place. This is Innovative Entrepreneurs, a podcast that will bring you the stories, insights, and tips from some of the most successful and innovative entrepreneurs in the world. I am your host, Erica Bailey, and I am here to help you start, scale, and sustain your own entrepreneurial journey. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to Innovative Entrepreneurs. This podcast is designed to help you think big, act bold, and learn from other phenomenal people. Whether you are seeking inspiration, actionable strategies, or just a reminder that you're not alone, this is your space. I'm your host, Erica Bailey, and as always, I like to start off with some gratitude. I'm thankful that you choose to tune in. I truly hope that we are able to bring you some value in each and every one of these episodes. So today, I am really excited and thrilled to have J.D. Barker. He is an international best-selling author whose work spans suspense, thrillers, horror, mystery, and more. Is right up my alley. His journey begins in Crystal Lake, Illinois, where his love for storytelling was sparked by classics like Dickens, Twain, and Poe. His debut novel, Forsaken, earned praise from the one and only Stephen King and a Bram Stoker Award nomination. He is also the co-author of Dracul. Am I saying that right? Dracul?
You are, yeah, Dracul.
It is a prequel to Dracula. It's based on Bram Stoker's original notes. With numerous bestsellers and collaborations, including with James Patterson. Oh, got goosebumps. JD's work has captivated readers worldwide and has inspired film and TV adaptations. Please join me in welcoming the innovative and accomplished J.D. Barker to the show. Welcome.
Wow, I'm going to make you follow me around and just introduce me like that every time I walk into a room.
Hey, you got it. You absolutely got it. I'm honored to have you here. Thank you so much. So I'm going through your bio and all of your information, and you have had an extraordinary journey as an author. So can you take us back to the beginning and maybe share how you got started in writing? Like what inspired you to pursue this path? And like, what was your driving motivation?
Wow, so we got to go way back for that. So I've been writing pretty much my entire life. When I was a little kid, I grew up without a TV in the house. So we were hitting the library at a very early age. And probably by around 3, I started reading. I had read all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew mysteries by the time I got into kindergarten. And that's when I moved on to the classics that you mentioned, like Charles Dickens and Mark Twain and those guys. After that, I picked up a copy of Dracula at a garage sale for 25 cents and kind of fell in love with the fact that a book could scare the bejesus out of me. And I spent the rest of my life trying to chase that, trying to figure out how to do that to other people. My parents encouraged writing from the get-go. They basically said, it's a fantastic hobby. You should do that, keep that creative thing going. But you can't make a living as an author. You've got to get a real job, and they drilled that into my head. So I did what everybody, is supposed to do. I finished up high school. I went into college, got a couple of degrees, ended up in the corporate world, working in finance of all places. My last real job, I was chief compliance officer for a brokerage firm. But through all that, I was working crazy. Yeah, it was as horrible as it sounds. It's like being internal affairs at a police station. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but it pays good if you could deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But, I would come home at night and I would write to stay sane. And, I pretty much wrote the entire time that all this was going on. When I was in college, I worked for BMG Distribution, which was a division of RCA Records. Okay. And I was essentially a glorified babysitter. So if they had a recording artist come into South Florida, I'd have to pick them up at the airport, get them to their radio stations for interviews, get them to their concert, get them to their hotel, and then get them back on their airplane when it was time to go. If you've ever seen the movie Get Them to the Greek, that was essentially my life. And I was in school at the time. School is very expensive, and I realized I've got some very famous people in the car with me, sometimes for days at a time. So I started to interview them, and then I would sell those interviews to magazines like 17 and People and Teen People and Tiger Beat and basically any magazine I saw my sister read when we were younger. Those were my target audience. And that's kind of how I got my start in all of this. When you work with newspapers and magazines, you quickly realize everybody you're working with, they've got a novel that they've been writing for the last few years. It's at some stage of development. It's in a desk drawer. It's 400,000 words long. It's almost there. It just needs a little something. They would hand them off to me because I was really good with grammar and punctuation. But I also learned I was very good at the developmental side of that. So I could take a book that was 400,000 words. I could tell them, you need to cut all of this. You need to combine these characters. This part of the story works. This part doesn't. I would give them those kind of suggestions. And then eventually that turned into people asking me, well, can I pay you to do that for me? And that's where the ghostwriter book doctor thing came in. So while I was working the corporate job, I would come home at night and I would work on these other projects, basically fine-tuning novels for other authors, for agents, for publishers, getting them ready for prime time, for publication. I did that for 23 years, and I ended up with 6 different books that hit the New York Times bestseller list that I had written, all with other people's names on the cover, which gets really old after a while. So when that 6th one hit up, my wife and I sat down and she said, listen, I know you want to be a full-time author. Let's find a way to make this happen. But I had that corporate job and, like I said, it paid really good. And we were kind of stuck. We had the trappings of that paycheck. We had a big house, we had cars, we had a boat. Our monthly nut was somewhere between $10,000 and $12,000. So I couldn't just walk away from the job because I had to pay for the lifestyle. So we came up with this crazy plan. We sold everything that we owned. We bought a tiny little duplex in Pittsburgh, rented out one side to some tenants so we could live off their rent. It basically got to the point where our bills were next to nothing. And we sat down at the kitchen table, looked at the bank statement, and she said, okay, we've got enough savings for you to go about 18 months before you have to get a real job again. Let's try and make the author thing work. Go. And I sat down and wrote my first book, Forsaken.
Wow. All right. Kudos to the wife, man. I mean, that takes some guts to go and just put everything else aside and be like, okay, we're going to follow our dreams. Like that takes some guts.
It was one of those things. I mean, I was 43 when that happened. So I could have easily spent another 20 years working this job that I absolutely hated, but I would have ended up with the nice big pension and the 401k and all these other things that come with that. But, I could see the end result. Like I picture myself sitting on the porch and in the rocking chair as an old man going, what if? And I just, I didn't want to look back on a life spent doing something that I didn't really want to do. So to me, it was worth taking that challenge and try it.
See, for us, we were forced into that challenge pretty much. I had worked JOBs. I got a bachelor's in justice studies, worked for a law firm, and I was told that I couldn't move up in the world because I was a young mom and needed to be home with the family. So I packed my stuff up and I left. And that same day, I applied to get my master's degree. And so I had worked on my master's degree. I worked kind of part-time with an SEO firm. That's really where I started, was doing search engine optimization. And after I got my master's degree, I graduated summa cum laude, top of my class. And I couldn't find a job because it was right when the market collapsed. So I couldn't find a job anywhere other than like McDonald's. And this was in Arizona. And so my husband has, a degree in technical communication. He is a self-trained graphic designer. And we're like, you know what? We're just going to do something. We had 3 kids. We had no money, no savings, but we were just going to start an agency. And here we are 15 years later. But I'll tell you, going from the security of a JOB to, all right, I am going to put my life in my own hands. Like that takes a lot of oomph. It really does.
It does. But like, would you ever go back to it? No. Yeah. That's the thing. Like once you get a taste, I think of being your own boss and being, steering the ship yourself. I don't know anybody that would ever go back.
I tried. Actually, we moved from Arizona to Wyoming, and one of my biggest clients that I had for 8 years was a childhood cancer foundation. And unfortunately, one of the founders passed away. So the foundation really shrunk up and they didn't need my services anymore. And I was lost. Like I had put so much time and energy and heart into this foundation, and I didn't know who I was for a little while. So I went back and worked for the hospital here as their marketing director. And I lasted like 10 months, but I was never happy. Like not once did I enjoy getting up and going to work. And so I'm like, you know what? No, I was not meant to be an employee. I was meant to be a mompreneur. I really was.
Well, when you take a step back, if you look at it from the outside, if you're working for somebody else, you're spending your entire life making somebody else's dreams come true. instead of chasing your own. But when you're actually in the middle of it, you don't see it that way. The security of that paycheck, it's very hard to walk away from that. Healthcare, if you're in the U.S., I mean, I talk to a lot of people outside the country. Healthcare in the U.S. here is a pain in the butt if you're self-employed and just trying to get that set up. So like that's hard to walk away from. But to me, it was worth it. I could have easily started writing books, I think, back in my 20s, but I don't know that I would have hit as well as I did because I had that 20-some years that was essentially a learning curve. Working with editors, I got hired by editors all the time. They would pick up a book that they were ready to publish. They loved the story. They would work with the author to try and fine tune it. And that author was just too close. They need to cut 20,000 words and they couldn't do it, or they had to combine some characters and they couldn't do it. So they would bring in somebody like me as a hired gun. And the funny thing is, like, if you're an author and your editor calls and wants to make a change, like they start that phone call, they tell you like 2 or 3 things they love about the book. Then they give you that one thing they really need to fix. And then they give you 2 or 3 more things they love about the book. So they sandwich the problem in between all this happy stuff. But when you're a hired gun, they don't sugarcoat anything. They would tell me this person can't write dialogue to save their life. This person, like the first half of the story drags. Nobody's going to get past page 60. Like they would tell me the truth. And I think hearing that truth coming out of the people that actually had to sell the book in the end, that's what really shaped my writing abilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's actually not as easy. I mean, I haven't worked with a lot of authors in my past. And so having to tell Kimberly, sweetheart, this reads like you are a drug addict. Like that, I had to say those words and it was really, really hard, but I'm not a yes person. So being able to say that to her, she was like, okay, now she understands that this was therapeutic for her, but now it's time for her to tell her story. And the result has been astonishing. Having to say it is hard. I can only imagine having to hear it is probably a little challenging, but it takes you to that next step. Like being able to just say those words really took her to that next step. And so it's a powerful moment, really.
You need a thick skin in this business for sure.
Apparently. So what did your parents do?
My dad was a contractor. So you had mentioned I was born in Lombard, Illinois, but I grew up primarily in Crystal Lake, which has nothing to do with the Friday the 13th movies other than the name. But we used to, when those movies came out, we had like tourists would show up thinking, is this the place? And no, it's not the place. That's not a real place. But my dad was a contractor in Illinois. And at one point he couldn't take the winters anymore, getting up at 5 a.m, having to work outside in the snow. He couldn't take it. So he moved the whole family to Florida, which I hated. I was 13 when we made that move. So I missed having seasons. Like I had a snowmobile. Like we just grew up with winter. In Florida, it's either hot or hotter. Like there's no seasons anymore. But I dealt with it. I lived down there for the longest time. When we made that move, there was a conscious decision to move out of the state. We went to Pittsburgh because my wife had family there. But I just wanted to get back to some place that had a fall, winter, and spring and summer again. And I really missed that.
Wow. So your work masterfully blends suspense, horror, mystery, and you have collaborated with icons like James Patterson, who I've read so many of his books. What do you think makes your approach unique, and how does that help you stand out in such a competitive industry?
Well, I do a lot of things that really aggravated my agent at the beginning, because the first thing, if you write a book that an agent picks up and an editor picks up, first thing they need to do is put you in a box. They need to be able to tell people this is a thriller, this is a this is a that. Your agent tells the editor that, the editor tells the marketing people that, the marketing people tell the bookstore owners that, and that's how they know where to put it in the store. I was scared to death of having to write the same book over and over again. I've got friends in this industry where that happens. They write 2 or 3 books. All of a sudden, one of them takes off and just skyrockets, becomes a New York Times bestseller. And they spend the next 20 years writing the same book, but different, because nobody wants, something too different from them. So I knew from the beginning I wasn't going to do that. I reached out to Dean Koontz, I've known for a while. He told me if you're going to bounce around in genre, you need to do it from the get-go. So if you look at the books that I put out, my first one was a horror novel. Second one was horror. The third one was a thriller. I bounced back and forth between genres. At one point, I was told that my primary audience was women 45 and over. So then I wrote a young adult book, because I see this as almost being a literary Pied Piper. Like, as long as I keep a common thread between all the books, and in my world, that's suspense, I can reach out to different groups and pick up new readers. So if I write a young adult book, I can reach a bunch of people that wouldn't normally read me and kind of bring them into the fold, and they'll pick up on the other titles. So from a business standpoint, that's worked out really well. But from, the publisher side, they hated that at the beginning because they just didn't know what to do with me. But we've worked it out, over the years. I love working with other people. I mean, you had mentioned James Patterson. He read The Fourth Monkey, my second book, and then we ended up talking, decided to collaborate together. And we're on, I think, book number 5 coming out in March. And he has taught me so much, not only on the writing front, but the business side. I think we've had more conversations on the business end of publishing than we have on actually brainstorming books. But I love to reach out to people like that and just kind of pick their brains. It helped me shape my career.
See why I'm a little like, I read all of those names, it's I'm an avid reader. Like, I will read probably 100 books a year. I also do a lot of Audible because I have ADHD, so it's hard for me to digest sometimes. And so I listen to a lot of books. So hearing these, I'm like, oh my gosh, I grew up reading their books. Oh, anyway, sorry, geeked out a little bit, but it's just who I am. So tell me about your debut novel. Tell me about Forsaken. Like, what is it about?
It's about the Salem witch trials. It's about an author who writes a book about a witch from the trials. He thinks it's totally fiction, but as they get further and further into it, we actually realize that the story he's telling is real. This person is actually reaching back to him from the grave and getting him to tell her story, and using the author to bring herself back into the living world. Like, all these things kind of unfold as the book progresses. So it gets, it starts off, fairly tame, and then we get into some uncharted territory. But it was a fun story to write. I love, anything scary. Like, I've always loved it from a writing standpoint, from a reading standpoint. I had a ball writing that one. But in the book, I had to explain where the wife buys a journal. And if you're writing a book, like, you just want to get to that last page. So I wrote that she walked into Needful Things, Stephen King's store, and bought it there. Fully expected to have to change that, but my wife read it. She said, before you do, let's see if we get King's permission to use it. So that's ultimately what we did. Initially we printed up a copy of the manuscript. He had a house that's about 10 minutes from my mom's house in Florida. We hopped in the car and figured we'd head over to Stephen King's house and just hand him the book. Life doesn't work that way. So King lives on a little island off the coast of Florida. It's called Casey Key. If you make a left, you go to like the public portion of this key. And if you make a right, that's basically the entire half of this island that he owns. And there's a private drive sign and no trespassing sign. There was a gate and another gate. We got about halfway down this road and we turned around. We just decided this was a really bad idea. I called a friend of mine who knew King, and he said, yeah, don't stalk Steve. He hates that. Here's his email address. Just send him the book. If he likes it, you'll hear back from him. If the book is terrible, he probably won't reply. I got an email back from King a few days later and said, I love this. Go ahead and use the reference. Let me know if you need anything. And he's been a huge supporter from the get-go. And I think in the author world, when you actually sit down and talk to an author, you realize everybody, started with nothing, in this world. Like, King wrote Carrie in a trailer wedged between a washer and dryer. J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Dan Brown wrote the Robert Langdon books. He was basically a nobody at the time. We all were when we start, and authors remember that. Luckily, the bigger names are more than willing to reach out and help the newer people coming up. I've done the same thing. I've made a conscious effort to try and help new authors out too. I mean, we're all paying it forward.
That is so cool. I love that. I love that you tried to hunt down Stephen King.
Yeah, that's honestly what lit up the sales on the book. Because the funny thing is, we never actually got to his house. But when I hired a PR firm to promote the book, I started telling them all these different things, these different stories. And when I mentioned that one, they said, you know what, that's the story. That's how we sell this. So they wrote that up, and ultimately Publishers Weekly wrote a story about this new author trying to get to Stephen King's house. Never actually gets there, but they wrote that up. That story came out and librarians saw it, bookstore owners saw it. And that's what really lit up sales for that first novel.
That's amazing. Bravery. Again, you're going back to that, like, I'm going to go ahead and jump 2 feet and just go for it. Like, that's pretty impressive. So like you're saying, writing, my understanding is it is often a challenging and really unpredictable career. So, like, what are some of the habits, routines, and I guess strategies that have helped you stay innovative and productive and successful during this journey of yours?
Well, it's changed a lot. I mean, now I do this full time. So I literally get up in the morning and just drop my butt in the seat and just go to work. But When I was, still working in the corporate world and writing like that was tricky. I knew I had to write at least 200 to 300 words a day. Like that was kind of my goal. And I would squeeze that out wherever I could. It could be at lunchtime. It might be in line at the grocery store while I'm pumping gas, whatever. I would write on my phone if that's what it took. But I always hit that word count. Because writing to me is very much like going to the gym. It's like exercising a muscle. If you do it every day, it gets stronger, it gets easier, you get better at it. If you wait a couple of weeks in between, or even a couple of days, like everything gets stale. Like if you only write like every other Saturday, let's say for a couple of hours, you're going to sit down. You're not even going to remember what you wrote the last time you were there because it had been so long. Your voice is going to change because so much time is going to pass. It's easier to crank out a couple words here or there and just keep at it all the time and stay on top of it. I learned a couple of little tricks that I used to do back in the day in order to make it happen. I always listen to a thunderstorm soundtrack when I'm writing, basically white noise, just a rainstorm on noise canceling headphones. Yeah, it's a Pavlov's dog thing. As soon as I hear that sound, my brain immediately snaps into writer mode. It knows this is what we're doing. I try to write in the same place every day, sitting in the same place, because again, if you do that, you train your mind to jump right into that mode when you sit down. And I never get up. I quit in the middle of a sentence, like every single time. I always know what's coming next. Because initially when I first started doing this, I would, do what a lot of my friends did. I would write it till the well runs dry. So I might have a huge day, 5,000-6,000 word day. I'm exhausted at the end. I've literally written everything I can possibly think of. It's like squeezing water from a rock. Then the next day when I sat down, I would stare at a blank screen sometimes for hours because I didn't know what else to write. And that's to me wasn't sustainable. So I get up, I do about, in today's world, 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. I get up in the middle of a sentence, when it's time to stop writing, it's time to stop. But my brain continues to work that story. And because I know what comes next, it's that much easier. So when I sit down the next day, I'm right back into it.
So when you write, do you know what the ending's going to be when you start? Like, is that typical or?
I've been all across the board when it comes to that. So I've got all these books behind me. I don't know if your audience can see this, but the only book that's back there that's actually on the craft of writing is On Writing by Stephen King. It's probably my favorite book on the actual profession of being an author. And in there, he says that he creates his characters, he creates his plot, he drops the people in the middle of the story, and he just kind of lets it play out. He doesn't know where the story is going, and he feels that if he doesn't know, the reader's not going to know. They can't pick up on it, which makes a lot of sense. So that's kind of how I started off. I would create my beginning, my plot, my characters. I normally have my beginning, something I wanted to happen in the middle. Usually I've got an ending in mind, but a lot of times that would change as I wrote the book. But it's good to have some type of ending so your brain knows where you're going. And I would get to the finish line, and ultimately I would end up, I typically write about 160,000 words on a book. Then I would go back and I would trim out about 40,000 of those words. So a lot of stuff ends up on the cutting room floor. It's almost like a good piece of steak where you just trim the fat away and just try to get to the leanest piece of meat before you hit that publish button. So that worked for me for a number of novels. And then I started working with James Patterson. And when we first met, we talked for a while. We went out to lunch, and he's a strict outliner. He writes 30 to 50 page outlines for every book before he actually writes the book, which is the exact opposite of what I was doing. I'm what they call a pantser or a discovery writer. I was literally just making it up as I went. And the styles are so different, we didn't think it would work. So we left that meeting thinking we wouldn't be able to work together. And then a couple months later, we touched base again. He's like, you know what, let's try it your way. Let's try to pants a novel. So I'm the only guy who's ever gotten James Patterson to literally pants a novel. I would write a chapter, put him in some kind of impossible scenario, send it off to him, thinking he's not going to get out of this. And 15 minutes later, he would send me another chapter. Not only did he get out of it, but he put me in an even crazier situation. And we went back and forth like that for the entire book. It's called The Coast to Coast Murders. It's by far the twistiest thing I've ever worked on. But when we finished that up, he said, okay, we've tried it your way. Now I want you to try it my way. And he sent me an outline for a book called The Noise. And I wrote that book with him based on the outline, and the process was so smooth, so fast. We had the story in front of us the entire time. When we got to the end, the process was just so much more efficient. So I've been outlining ever since. It's always changing for me. And I always encourage authors to try, all the different methods until you land on something that works. And even when you land on something that works, it may not work forever. You may try it for a couple of books and move on and try something different. Keep it fresh.
Do you ever get writer's block?
Not yet. But now that you bring it up, it's probably going to happen tomorrow. It'll be your fault.
That out of the universe. Universe, you didn't hear that. You didn't hear that. What inspires your ideas? Like you have to come up with these new ideas every time. Like, where do they come from?
I've never had a shortage of ideas. I've got a document on my phone in my note app called Ideas. And literally anytime I come up with anything, I drop it in there. But usually a book will come together when I take 2 or 3 different ideas and kind of mix them up. So to give you an example, my last book, it was called Behind a Closed Door. It came out last May. I had a husband and wife character set in mind for like the longest time, just like the basis for characters. Abby and Brendan Hollander, they've been married for about 10 years. They're both kind of leading separate lives. They both have careers, so they see each other first thing in the morning. They see each other at the end of the day. They watch Netflix for maybe a half hour, fall asleep, and kind of rinse and repeat. And they're 10 years into this marriage, so they've sort of drifted apart. They still love each other, but they're leading separate lives in a lot of ways, which is not different from many couples that I know. So at one point, Brendan he almost slips. It's very close to being an infidelity. It doesn't actually happen, but it's a big wake up call for the two of them. So like I knew that I wanted to write about those people, but I didn't understand or didn't know under what context I would use them. So they sat on that document on my phone for a couple of years. Then one night, my wife and I, we were sitting around having dinner. She does real estate, and she had just bought a house in Georgia, and it was a pretty big house. I think it had 7 bathrooms in it. And she was planning on renovating it and turning it into a large Airbnb. Okay. Because of the number of bathrooms, I just casually mentioned, well, you should call bath fitters. And, we've all seen those commercials. It's a company, they come in 24 hours, they do like a cosmetic refresh of a bathroom. So, if you don't have to change any plumbing or anything, they can kind of make it look like it's a brand new bathroom. So we literally just talked about it. Nobody typed it into any device or anything like that. But that night, we both started seeing ads for bath fitters pop up on our social media feeds and on television. We were watching Hulu and commercials came up. So I started digging into the terms of service, and I realized that when we actually agreed to those terms of services with our phones, whether you've got an iPhone or an Android, we give those manufacturers permission to listen to us 24/7. So like my phone is sitting next to me. It's listening to this entire conversation. It's grabbing keywords out of the air. Those keywords are going into a database, and they sell that information and use it to market stuff to us. So I started thinking, what if? Everything in writing is based on what if. So what if this information falls into the wrong hands? Then I paired that back up with Brendan and Abby. So we're back to them. They just had this infidelity. They want to save their marriage. So I start the book with them sitting in a therapist office, discussing what happened. And at the end of this chapter, the therapist advises them to download an app. It's called Sugar and Spice, and it's essentially Truth or Dare for adults. But it's meant to rekindle their marriage. So they download this app to their phone, like many of us have done in the past, not realizing what kind of door they're actually opening to these people that actually capture all of this data and use it against us. Ultimately, it starts off with real simple truths or dares, but they get a little bit more and more risque as the book goes on. And then Abby ends up getting one day, and it says, "Would you kill a total stranger to save someone you love?" Her best friend hits yes on the button that comes up, and before they know it, they're looking at a map with a pin, and a timer is ticking off in the corner. And then hijinks ensue. It was a fun story, but that's basically how it came together. It was 2 totally different things, like peanut butter and chocolate. They just kind of worked.
Oh, they do work. They do work. Oh, I love peanut butter and chocolate. That is so cool, man. I'm going to have to just start reading everything you write, apparently. Because everything you've said is like, oh, that sounds like me. Oh, that sounds like me. Okay, so for aspiring writers, I mean, to be an author, you also have to be an entrepreneur. Like you are your own business at that point. So for those who are looking to make their mark in today's, I guess, fast-changing creative industries, what key advice would you offer to help them succeed?
Well, I think ultimately you have to realize that you're selling a product. It's not really about a book. You're selling a widget. You're creating a brand. Like those are the types of things, or the way I in my world, that's how I've approached it. Because a lot of people that I've known, like you write a book and it's about the art. It's like they like the process of storytelling. That's great, but like you need to sell that art to somebody. So advertising, marketing, all these things, they all come into play. I watch what everybody else is doing. One of the people that I had driven around back in the day when I was doing those interviews was Madonna. And we were talking about Vogue. It was the album she was promoting at the time. And she told me that whenever she had a new album coming out, she would make a list of what she saw everybody else doing to promote their albums. And then once she had that list together, she would make another list of things nobody's doing. And then that's what she would do. She called it zigging instead of zagging. So that's essentially what I've always done. I look at how other people are promoting their books in today's world. Then I take a step back and I come up with some unique twist, something that nobody's doing. To give you an example, I've got a book coming out in May. It's called Something I Keep Upstairs. It's about a haunted house. The tagline for the book is, "For a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die." It's a really, really creepy story. But the cool part about it is it's actually based on a real house. I live on an island off the coast of Portsmouth in New England. I go for a run every day. And when I'm standing out on the beach, I can look out across the water, and about a quarter mile out, there's a tiny little island with a little white house with a red roof on it. I saw this house every day on my run for years. And I was like, what is going on in that house? Like, it's just far enough away where you can't really tell. Like, you can see activity, you can see something happening, but you don't really know what. So that basically became the basis of this story. But from a promotion standpoint, the house is now a museum. I paired up with the people who own it, and to promote the book, we're actually giving away an overnight stay in this house, which is very haunted. It's been there for a very long time. So one lucky winner, we're going to draw their name. They're going to get to pick 3 of their friends. We're going to take them out to this house by boat, because that's the only way to get there. Drop them off on the dock, and nobody's coming back them for 24 hours. So they're going to spend one full day in a haunted house as part of the promotion for this book. Now, not only is that a fun, cool idea, the flip side of it is everybody talks about it. So we put out from a business standpoint, we put out a national press release. The newspapers, magazines, and media outlets all see this, and they're like, holy crap, an author is giving away an overnight stay in a haunted house to promote his book. They talk about that. So that's, essentially creates word of mouth, which will ultimately end up driving book sales. So I'm always looking for something unique like that when it comes to selling books.
Brilliant. I actually So ghost hunting is like one of my favorite pastimes. I've spent the night in 3 different haunted hotels and have toured like multiple different places. Like, one of my dreams is to spend the night at the Shining Hotel. So like that, I'm totally geeked out about that. It is brilliant. It is honestly brilliant.
I actually wrote the final chapter of The Fourth Monkey in the same room that Stephen King stayed in at the Stanley. As part of it, I was out there with Josh Mallerman and Jack Ketchum and a few other authors for a like a small little writers conference. Really cool hotel. If any of your listeners ever get the chance to get out to Estes Park, it's more than worth the crazy drive you've got to do to get out there to reach it. The house, though, for this haunted house story, like the island, like there's so much history and lore that I learned about it. The locals talk about it all the time. There are tons of ghost stories about this island. Back in the day, it was used as a prison during the Spanish-American War. It was a quarantine zone during yellow fever. So a lot of people have passed away out there. But the one story that really grabbed me, back in 1972, somebody boated out there on a Saturday to picnic on the beach, and they found 2 bodies buried in the sand. Because of where the house is located, it's right on the border with New Hampshire and Maine. Nobody knew from a jurisdiction standpoint who's supposed to investigate it, like who's actually in charge of this particular island. There's only one newspaper article that I could find about these bodies being found. The FBI basically took over the investigation because the locals couldn't decide who was supposed to do it. But I reached out to all these law enforcement agencies while I was researching the book, and the FBI, other than that initial contact, they've got no documentation to support an investigation. None of the local police departments have anything either. So the investigation basically just disappeared. Nobody even to this day knows who those 2 people were, or how they got there, or why they were there. But there are tons of crazy, creepy stories like that about this particular place that are all true. So as a ghost hunter, like, we've had a lot of people that have just wanted to head out there with their meters to figure out what's going on. I can tell you, just standing in that place, it creeps me out. Like I don't know that I would stay overnight in that house. There's something there.
There's something there, huh?
Yeah, we're having fun with it though.
That's a brilliant strategy, though. I mean, truly, it's a differentiator right there. And, for things to succeed the way that they're supposed to, you have to have some sort of a differentiator in the brand, in the marketing. So well done. Like, good job.
Well, if you think of it this way, this year, 2025, there's going to be 2.4 million books published on Amazon. And that's before you include AI generated content, because nobody has any clue how many books are going to come out of that. But they're estimating 2.4 million books from indie authors and publishers hitting Amazon just this year. So if you're an author, you've got one book coming out, what are you going to do to make your book rise to the top and stand out against that 2.4 million that's coming out alongside you?
That is insane. 2.4 million this year?
Yeah, that number was a little shy of 1 million back in 2014 when I first started. So it's increased quite a bit.
Yeah, you have to stand out among the crowd, and giving people a night at a haunted house, man, that's freaking brilliant. Oh my gosh. So let's talk about, a lot of your works have been adapted for film and TV. So you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've been crazy lucky when it comes to that. I've got 8 different projects in what I call various stages of Hollywood hell. The funny thing is, the only one that actually hasn't got an option yet is Forsaken, the one with the Stephen King tie-in. And unfortunately, it's because of the Stephen King tie-in. Like, we've had plenty of studios that have approached us and they wanted to do it. And we start telling them about that particular aspect, and they back away slowly because the lawyers get their ear.
Wow.
Because it's tied to Needful Things. Needful Things is already optioned by somebody else. That means that studio's got to agree to everything that we do. And like, there's so many parts involved. Everybody just, nobody wants to deal with that.
Red tape.
Yeah. I mean, Hollywood is a crazy thing. Whenever I get a call from my agent, it's either really good news or really bad news. Like, there's no in between. And the projects are constantly in flux. This one's got a director, this one's got a writer, this one's got a showrunner, this one just lost its director, this one's got a star, this one just lost its star. At this point, nothing's been made. Everything's been optioned over and over again. Behind the Closed Door seems to be moving the fastest. Everybody wants to see my 4MK series on the screen, and I do too. It started off with CBS. They were going to do a TV show, followed up with a feature film, followed up with a TV show. That never happened. Lionsgate stepped in. They wanted to do a streaming series with one season per book. That's kind of where it's at now. But Behind the Closed Door, that one sold very, very fast on the Hollywood side. Like, it was being shopped at the traditional publishers, and the folks in Hollywood just started calling. We got calls from Sony, from Netflix, from HBO, all these big production companies. They basically heard about the book from the people that were reading it. And we ended up going to auction, and we signed an option agreement on that one. But it's moving very quickly. So I've got a feeling that's probably going to be the first one that actually gets to screen. Wow. But, you just never know. Somebody had once told me, if you watch the credits at the end of a movie, 5 or 6 minutes worth of names flying by, every single person that's listed there had to be there in order for that movie to get to the screen. You take one of them away, and all of a sudden it doesn't happen. And when you've got books that have been optioned, you actually see that play out in real time. Like, it's this perfect storm has to come together of the writers, directors, stars, producers, all at the right moment in time in order for it to happen. And one little hiccup can side rail it, and then you have to basically start over.
Wow. This is so cool. Have you ever, during this whole journey of yours, how long have you been writing now?
Professionally since 2014, so 10 years as a full-time author.
In that 10 years, have you ever experienced imposter syndrome?
Oh, all the time.
Really?
And I can tell you, like, I know all the big name authors at this point. It happens to everybody. You don't escape that. And I think there's a psychological reason for it. So if you actually write a book, it's a slow moving process. If you write, let's say, 1,000 words a day, that's roughly 3 to 4 pages. So think about that. That's 4 or 5 hours worth of time to write 3 or 4 pages. Now, a reader is going to sit back and they're going to read those 3 or 4 pages in a minute or two. So they're going to fly by. So because the process is so slowed down, I think you're so close to the storytelling, it doesn't necessarily feel as good as it might. Like, you're seeing the individual words, you're not really seeing it play out as a story. There's a lot of things different about it. So a lot of times, if I start feeling imposter syndrome creep in, and a lot of times it's when I get to the end of a book, at the end of the writing process, I'll take a step back and I'll read it, actually just read the book like a reader. And then I realize I actually do know what I'm doing, and I can jump right back into it again. For me, reading reviews from readers like that sparks me up too. I mean, I get tons of good reviews, and that helps stroke the ego a little bit, keeps the batteries charged. So I review those all the time. I review the bad ones too, because a lot of times there's stuff in there that helps me shape the next book. If I see multiple people complaining about the same problem over and over again, that's a wake up call. You got to fix that problem. So I try to read all of it.
That's smart, although it's probably challenging, but it's smart. Definitely. A lot of my solo casts, a lot of my podcasts, we talk about imposter syndrome, and a lot of my solo casts, I'm very open about mental health, and especially with women in business. And I literally just finished recording one where I was talking about how your profession or your personal life can really impact your professional life in that sense. And what I saw when I did my research is like 86% of entrepreneurs, 78% of entrepreneurs experience imposter syndrome, with 59% who actually consider leaving their roles or their careers because of it. It's a real thing, and it's hard to get past. So it's kind of, I guess it's nice to hear that somebody who has had so much experience and has been around so many awesome people still experience that. It's not just the little us's,
Well, the truth of it is, in order to succeed, you've got to fail a bunch of times, right? You've got to fall on your face. I mean, I throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall, and like maybe 1 or 2 things will stick out of the last 10 that I put up there. So 8 failures and 1 win. So you've got to learn to see past those failures and just kind of keep going. I don't know a single entrepreneur that's successful that isn't willing to go out on a limb and try something totally different. And they are totally willing to fall on their face doing it because they do understand that if it works, it's going to work big. And that's the trade-off. You have to get used to that.
Have you ever written something and then completely scrapped it?
Oh yeah, I've got tons. There's probably 4 or 5 books on my computer that will never see the light of day. I should take that back. Probably when I die, my daughter will probably find them and at some point publish them. But in my world, I probably won't put them out. I think everybody needs to write about 500,000 words before they even figure out what they're doing. A lot of people, they think I'm going to write a book, and they, sit down and they write their first book, and they get to the finish line and they think they did it right. And maybe they did, maybe they got lucky, but it's like anything else. You've got to practice, you've got to hone the craft, you got to study, you've got to realize what works, what doesn't work. You've got to incorporate all that. Nobody really, comes out of the gate and gets it right straight off the bat. And the funny thing is, in today's world, a lot of authors, they will then take that book, they'll send it off to agents, they get rejected by those agents. And then rather than seeing the rejections for what they are, meaning that there's something wrong with the book, that's why they didn't take it, they say, oh, well, I'm just going to self-publish it then instead. So then they take it and they put it out on Amazon, they hit that button, and their friends and family read it. They give them 5-star reviews. You get 15, 20 of those from everybody that you know. A little bit good about yourself. And then all of a sudden, real readers actually stumble into that book and they start giving you a 1-star and 2-star, and they start pointing out all the flaws in it. And at that point, it's too late to fix. Like, you've already cemented your career. Your writer name is already up there with a book that's got 2.5-star average or whatever. It's hard to back away from that, because if you come out with another book and you try to take that to an agent, they're going to see that 2.5-star reviewed book up there. That's your track record. That's your sales record. They're going to judge you by that. It's like, there's so many decisions that need to be made before you hit that publish button. In my mind, every book needs to be a 5-star read before you even present it to somebody else. You need to get it to that level. And ultimately, I think that's what it takes to succeed, because you can spend as much money as you want on Facebook ads. You can drive sales to a book. But the only thing that's going to really make it successful is word of mouth sales. And you're not going to get those unless people are talking about that book. They have to love it enough to tell 3 of their friends. And it's got to be good.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing all of this. So obviously this podcast is called Innovative Entrepreneurs. And at the end of every episode, I ask, who is the most innovative person or entrepreneur who has influenced you the most, and why?
Well, for me, that's easy. It's James Patterson for sure. Because he's taught me so much on the writer front, but on the business side, we have had so many discussions. He's steered my career in many ways, and he's become a sounding board for some of the decisions that I've made. I just struck a new deal with Simon & Schuster. I basically created my own imprint with Simon & Schuster, which is something I think you're going to see other authors do, down the road. But I'm the first one to the table to do it. And, he was a big help in that. I don't think I would have pulled that trigger without his advice.
I can hear the audible in my head now. This book is brought to you. Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much, JD, for sharing this with us, for joining me. Like, I am like fan geeking out here. So it's an honor. How can my listeners find you? Like, where's the best place to go find all of your works?
The easiest place to find me is jdbarker.com. All the books are there, and you can find them in pretty much any bookstore.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you again. Is there anything else you would like to share with my audience before we head out?
I've got 3 books coming out in the next couple of months. So we've got We Don't Talk About Emma coming out in February. In March, the book behind me. In March, I've got The Writer coming out with James Patterson, which is, it's probably my favorite book out of the ones that we've done together. We had a lot of fun writing that one. And then in May, I've got the one about the haunted house coming out, something I keep upstairs. That one shouldn't be missed.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Well, I will definitely be getting these books. And again, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I hope that we were able to bring value to others. So appreciate it.
Wow, what a great episode. I hope you had as much fun as I did. If you want more of this goodness, make sure you subscribe so that you get notifications for future podcasts. And if you found value from this, please share it with others. You can visit our website at cwgdigital.com. This is Erica Bailey. I am your host, and I will see you next time.